Welcome to the Heart of Healthcare podcast.
Hallie Tecco and I are excited to host today Emily Melton. Emily is a co-founder of Threshold Ventures. Her portfolio includes, among others, Brightline, Calibrate, Elation Health, Livongo, Uda Health, Tia, and so many more. Today is our 2025 Digital Health Recap episode, and we're going to pick her brain about everything digital health. Emily, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Michael and I have got to work on many companies together and had many late night calls. So it's nice to actually be doing this. I really appreciate you guys inviting me.
Super excited to have you, Emily. So let me kick it off. Before we dive into the year recap, can you tell listeners about your career arc as a healthcare investor? I mean, you started investing in 1999 to 2000, meaning you're one of the few VCs who have gone through 3 cycles as an investor.
That is another way of calling me old. I oftentimes like to start conversations where I say, I am lucky because enhanced blonde gets to cover the grays, but they are there. And they have all been earned. I have been doing this for 26 years at this point. I was hired by Tim Draper, Draper Fisher Jurvetson. And interestingly, I went in because I had a job offer from one of his portfolio companies. So it was 99, 2000. I was working at a law firm. I thought I would be following Michael's path, and all my
enlightened.
Clients,
that's what you're so good, Emily.
I know.
You're enlightened. You're enlightened.
Well, all of my clients kept offering me jobs, and I remember one of them was offering me more money than my dad was making from a salary. And I was like, well, what are your profits? And they're like, we don't have profits. I'm like, what are your revenues? I'm like, well, we don't have revenues. I'm like, how can you pay me if you don't have profits and revenues? And they're like, well, the venture capitalists give us money. And I'm like, why are the venture capitalists giving you money if you don't have profits and revenues? So it's very, very simple. Both my parents grew up on farms in Utah. It was like very simplistic first principles thinking. If I'm going to pick a company, I should understand the venture capitalists that are behind these companies. And I went in, one of the companies, I got introduced to someone through Utah, to Tim Draper, and went in with a list of questions about one of his companies. And it was great. He looked at me, he's like, those were all really good questions. Come and do that for me. I was like, do what? And so I remember I called my boyfriend at the time, now husband, and said, I think I just got a job in venture. He's like, no one just gets a job in venture. So in 2000, there was a handful of firms. They mostly looked the same. They mostly had the same kind of, 5 to 7 partners up and down Sand Hill Road. There were sometimes some associates or junior people, but it hadn't really professionalized to the extent it is now. It looked extremely different. And so when I came in, half the people didn't know if I was in. We had, so DFJ had one partner, Jen Fonstad. I would say, interestingly, and I can take this in a different direction because of All Rays, but when I started in 2000, most firms had one partner, some two. There was actually less women partners in 2010 than there were in 2000. So a lot of the women lost their jobs during the dot-com bust. And I would actually argue we're seeing a little bit of a similar cycle happen now, where you saw a lot of women, move to prominence in kind of this the easy money period, and they're quietly leaving their firm. So it's always one of those fears because I had seen that play through, and I don't think people realize how common that is. But yeah, I mean, as a junior woman, people didn't know if I was an assistant. They didn't know what to do with me. But I started and the market imploded. And I remember trying to figure out why everyone wasn't panicked, because I didn't fully understand management fees, because I was like, the companies are all dying. Am I going to lose my job? And everyone's like, no. And since I was the most junior person, I would just say all the crap rolled downhill. I was doing assignment for the benefit of creditors. I was the person selling those chairs. I was negotiating out with landlords and lease. So it was actually a really good time to learn and understand the excesses of a market. I didn't invest on the way up, but I did on the way down. I do remember joining where one of the receptionists had bought a car because you got friends and family shares from an IPO. And within a day, it was just, there was like free money, and then it all just went away. And then it's kind of the rebuild. And the other thing is not thinking of it's not one day. It's not like one day everything changes. It's like it's slowly, there were some cracks. And then really, and Michael will remember this, it was like it was the consumer kind of internet businesses. And then it was the global crossings and then all of the infrastructure that happened 6 to 9 months later. So kind of seeing that pull down. And then honestly, this is where it's interesting. That was a really good time to be investing. That correction, that when you had the real entrepreneurs, people who were solving real problems, there wasn't this idea of easy money. People weren't thinking about going public in 18 months. And so that was my early foundation of the career. Then we worked way up to be partner. And that was then the, global financial crisis. That was particularly interesting for me because my husband worked at Lehman Brothers. And so we had then our family planning and had savings, or we bought a house in Silicon Valley, which is scary as all get out. But we were okay because we had the RSUs, and there's no way Lehman's going to go to zero. So I got to experience both as an investor, but also personally going through that and seeing what happened. I think the global financial crisis is really interesting in that it was a macro scary event, and there was a period of time where people like Box, one of our investment companies, couldn't raise capital, so we got to do a flat round. Like there was some slowdown in the market, but the underlying fundamentals of most of the technology companies weren't hit by that. They actually benefited, and it really set up the big roll up that happened afterwards. That was really set up for the boom. So while it looked like a crisis, like crises are opportunities, that was really an opportunity that I think led to the foundation of what you see as the kind of current venture capital with a lot of returns, SaaS being something people could really comfortably invest in, leading people to read bigger and bigger funds. And now you're seeing the transformation of venture. And we can talk about that. But 2000, you had a number of funds, like Benchmark had a $1.6 billion fund. Excel had a $1 billion fund. They had to give half back. There was a scaling of venture, and then they got smaller. Things have been pretty kind of steady state growing. I think that this new venture landscape isn't going to change. I think we are going to have these mega funds, special funds. And so I do think that the overall venture ecosystem has really changed. I started at DFJ. We opportunistically did healthcare. We were in Athena Health and Hippocrates. And it was kind of what I would say is like the founding fathers of digital health, right? And so getting to see the struggles and the challenges they had in building those businesses. But I had preeclampsia, I had 2 complex pregnancies. I had melanoma. So this is a fake ear. It's been reconstructed. I've experienced the healthcare ecosystem as a consumer. And when you understand what's possible via technology and you see all these applications and you know that it can be implemented in healthcare, all of us can nod. Healthcare is not the easiest way to make money. There's a lot of easier ways. No. But I have felt that pull and that desire to really leverage some of my know-how and some of the relationships I have and being able to empower these entrepreneurs to actually do something different.
What was your first healthcare deal?
I had a thesis around self-insured employers and went deep and sat on the National Business Groups of Health's Innovation Panel. And that was where I heard diabetes as being one of the key things over and over again. So Livongo was one of the first investments we made. We also made the investment in Doximity in that fund, because we had known him from Hippocrates. And I'm saying this and then Wellframe, which was acquired by Health Edge, which ended up. So we had a reasonable, this has not been an industry where you've seen a lot of exits and it's taken longer. We were reasonably lucky in Fund 1, we actually did have not only some good investments, but in terms of their value they brought to consumers, but they were also good financial investments. In even more recently, in Fund 2 and 3 and 4, I was investing in the intersection of AI and healthcare in 2016, 2017. I'm the board of a company called Imogen, board of a company Viz.ai. I could rant and rave about this, but deep learning algorithms have been capable of doing diagnostics since 2017, 2018. One of the companies was a de novo application through the FDA to enable that kind of capability. It took a while for the market to be ready. Here, we didn't need generative AI to actually substantially improve diagnostic capabilities in healthcare. But I'm excited because it does feel like the market is finally ready to embrace some of these technologies.
Do you think, Emily, coming to exits quickly, because you referenced that, this has been one of the challenges I've observed as counsel to so many terrific companies in our sector. Where are the big exits? Where is the big whiz Google deal in healthcare?
We'll see, right? I don't know. I think that when you talk about a whiz or those are strategic, valuable assets to companies that have wonderful balance sheets and extreme leverage in their business models, right? When you look at a Google or a Meta or someone, one of the challenges of healthcare is if you look at most of the players, these are not high margin businesses so they need to have things that are actually truly accretive. And so one of the things I think it's going to be interesting is, Google has had some initiatives in healthcare. Satya's referencing Microsoft's work with Health Copilot and others. They're getting much more embedded in clinical workflow. So I think Apple has obviously kind of danced around it a lot with their devices. So one question is does this become strategically interesting to some of those businesses? PillPack's exit via Amazon, One Medical via Amazon. Are you going to see them start to play more in that space because there's viable businesses or not? And I think a lot of those are going to be generating the consumer-led businesses versus the ones that are actually playing in the ecosystem. I do think this market has not been friendly for almost anyone to go public. So I think that's everyone wants to be difficult on healthcare or digital health, but I think that's true broadly. I do think that there are some companies that, are growing at good rates, have good margins that in a more normal environment would be able to do it. My husband has the saying, happiness equals reality minus expectations. And one of the challenges is for all these companies, if you raise at a really high price, in 21, 122, you can be like a good business, right? And go public, but you're actually below where you raise that. And so I think we're still trying to work through that, like the reality of expectations and having people flow through. But all that being said, AI does change the game in a lot of ways. And I think there are some companies that are going to really benefit from that. It's still healthcare. You're still going to have regulated components. You're still going to have some of the hurdles that you have to face. But I do think that AI could have a much more profound impact. I know you guys are digital health. I've always hated the phrase digital health. It's like telehealth. I don't even own a telephone and we call it telehealth. And it's like digital health. Like it's like feels like my grandmother saying something. It should just be healthcare. But there is something of like, I think digital was just like, it's obvious that you should be able to use these tools. And it becomes Epic, which is like 30-year-old software. AI, I think, changes. Like there's actually going to have to be a bigger step function, which hopefully we'll actually see some increase of value along with that step function. The last thing I would say is AI replaces work, not just software. Software enhances productivity. AI should be able to replace people. And I think when you look at the dynamics of what's happening in healthcare, the healthcare shortages of workers and others, that is where there's a real opportunity. It's replacing the human labor with AI labor to actually bring down overall costs.
And I will defend the public markets because we have seen, Duximity, which Emily knows of, now $10 billion company, Hims and Hers, not even 10 years old and performing well. So I think that we're starting to build credibility in the public markets. Where I see more concern this year and going forward, Emily, I'm curious your take on it, is going back to the because besides Amazon, some of the largest acquisitions have been to the health plans. Like we really need United and Optum to continue buying these companies because those are some of the biggest organizations in our space, but they're struggling now too.
Yeah, UHG's stock over the last 18 months has been nothing short of dramatic in a way that's like you wouldn't have ever expected that. I do think, what is it to be a plan, right? And that I think those could actually change because a lot of when you talk about Optum, there's the UHG is the health plan, and then there's Optum, which is a delivery network, right? They employ more primary care physicians than anyone else in the country. So it's the provider piece as well as the payer piece, and what does that look like? I think we're going to know a lot more once we start to actually understand what some of the incentives are coming out of this administration, right? For better or worse, like I always think, business imperatives, but policy incentives do drive some behavior. And so there's a lot of conversation about what is actually true value-based care. What is it? People have been flown around a lot with the rate adjustments. And so there wasn't a lot of acquisitive nature there because, people who are making assumptions based off of one kind of reimbursement rate, like environment, ended up in something that was very different. So I think we both need clarity and stability in order to see those entities be more aggressive. I also think that if you look at healthcare generally, not necessarily like just the digital health, most of that private equity is one of the largest players in that. And I think you're starting to see that. The challenge is the gap between the way that venture likes to fund businesses and losses relative to the way that private equity thinks about it is pretty dramatic. But when you see things like, Smarter DX and others where people are there is some interesting is the technology overlay on top of physical footprints going to create net new opportunities. We might see like a new class of kind of mergers that happen that are that hybrid venture, venture technology plus private equity. And even some of my brethren in venture that have raised really large funds are trying to look at doing some of these hybrid kind of deals.
Yeah, it seems like in the last few quarters in the short term, Emily, we've seen a lot of activity. And I think in many ways they're positioned in the press as acquisitions. But what we're seeing is the typical 70-30 where they come in, acquire, the cap table, they own 70%, they put 30% in the hands of management. Sometimes they'll let the existing VCs roll in. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes they won't. And so we're seeing a lot of that kind of activity, but I wouldn't quite call them truly exit events because they're in some ways, yes, there's cash, but it's sort of the idea is, well, this is not quite getting the multiple that the venture investors are hoping for. And so, I don't know.
Smarter DX was a positive one, right? I think in general and that's why I called it, but it's not a lot of those. Yeah. I think you're right. I think most of them are more distressed, or I would say private equity has been shopping, but more like bargain basement shopping
Bargain
versus strategic shopping. And so then the
Love
question
it.
is do they suddenly start to move up? Like it's a
Yeah.
bargain basement, and then do you move up to level 1, level 2, level 3, 3 being strategic? They're still mostly in the basement. But again, I think with some of the policy incentives and others that you might actually see a little bit of movement there, there's enormous amounts of dry powder in private equity sitting on the sidelines. And so what happens with that, I don't know. But you're right, the model doesn't work. This isn't only true for healthcare, right? I think SaaS is starting to recognize
It's
this
across
as
the
well.
venture landscape. Yeah,
I think
for
the whole
sure.
venture landscape is like when you have, especially like you guys, as you alluded to early on, me being old. I remember sitting around when
Wise.
YouTube, wise and old.
By the
When
way,
YouTube
we're
was
the same
acquired
age.
for $1.6 billion, and we're like, this is insane, right? Now that's like a series.
Right.
You have all these people who have been raised in this industry in
Mm.
the last 10 years, assuming success is only a $10 billion exit. You know, Doximity is $10 billion, but it's also profitable. It throws off cash.
Yeah.
He's been at that for, 15, 20 years. It's not a flash in the pan. And so, like, when your entry points to these Series A start being 200, 400, and then you have like C's in the billions, it kind of messes up the ability to find a lot of these rational exits.
Yeah.
And then yet you go to the public markets and SaaS is trading at 5 to 7x, right?
Right.
And digital health. So I think there's just that's why I think there's so much enthusiasm around AI, is because we can, like, at least for now, like, try to avoid the reality of like what is actual multiples. But over time, I always say you got to pay the piper. And over time, that's all going to flow through, that you're going to have to rationalize it.
Well, I mean, on that note, just on inflated valuations, there's a lot of talk in tech right now about the rise of the Icarus, which of course is the mortal figure in Greek mythology known for flying too close to the sun. Did you see this in healthcare this year? Do you feel like inflated valuations were back?
It's my mantra of 2025 has been haves and have-nots. There's nothing in between, right? And like the haves are mostly AI businesses, are oftentimes getting to revenue very, very quickly. They're oftentimes not particularly sticky or proprietary revenue. Most of it, because it is actually getting to revenue quickly, is on the administrative side. You're not seeing people play. This is why scribes are hot, or revenue cycle management, or everybody going and trying to act like there's a horizontal layer where actually it's really a lot of sub-markets that you need to navigate. And you're seeing those guys be able to raise, people are again projecting those AI high-end multiples and raise really quickly high prices. Then it's like all the companies that have, I think worst case is actually, I've never watched Silicon Valley because I don't think it's too close to home, but everyone keeps sending me this clip of like, don't get revenues because that's bad. It feels like that's true. Like the more like you've been around for a while and you're like 30 million in revenue, or like no one cares. It's the weirdest market of just, it's not even being critical. It's just being indifferent. Like if it's not growing 200%, it's not this, like the value is almost negligent. Whereas historically in my 20 years plus of experience, there's always a rational buyer at some rational price if there's value there. And I haven't found that. I found that the venture dollars are all really getting concentrated on the high flyers and feeling like piling, and there's a safety in piling a lot of money into all the same names versus actually looking for a good investment.
Yeah.
And that's true of venture broadly. That's not just healthcare. Like if you look at the data that came out, it was like 41% in 10 names. It's 75% if you go up to 20 names of the entire venture industry. And so with OpenAI taking like 50 billion, like there's just a handful of companies that are getting all of the investment dollars. And like the only one I think that's in healthcare that's even on that list is a Bridge. Right. So other than that, like if you think of it, just healthcare has been challenged and then we're not in that hot category. And then just in broadly, most companies have been challenged because they aren't in those hot, that hot category.
It's interesting, Emily, because I too, as I sit in my unique purchase counsel to some of these companies, you sort of see the chasm between the have and have-nots certainly get bigger. And I would say the haves is shrinking as well. So it's a combination of both. And what I'm seeing in health tech, which is the phrase I like to use a little better than digital health myself, is those that are AI native companies are able to command those kinds of exciting opportunities. Those that are tech-enabled services that are trying to slap on an AI solution on top of it are not quite reaping the multiples and the dollars the way an Abridge and Ambiance is able to in this market.
I would argue though, this is one of those part of the cycles where you're not seeing great diligence. And there's a lot of companies that are AI native that if you peel back, they've got people picking up the phone, still calling in the Philippines or not, and they're going to figure out the AI on top of it. So yes, I agree with you, but I also think there's a higher level of discipline that AI is not yet other than voice to text. Like there's some really easy, which is why it can be commoditized and Microsoft can roll it out and everyone can compete. But the other complexity, it's not there you to handle it on the edge. So the edge cases still requires humans, and people are funding it like those humans are going to go away right away. And like they're not doing the work of like really understanding. I think we started, you and I, Michael, have lived this. We started with tech-enabled services. We're at 30% now, but we're going to get to 60%, right? And that was like the whole pitch of everything in 2000 to 2002.
Yeah.
And I saw it with Livongo. We started at 50% gross margins and got up to 80. Like it is possible, but in very specific categories. Now it's the opposite, which they're starting showing they're at 80%, but I think they're going to go the other direction where they realize that the technology isn't going to manage it. But I still think like most of this stuff is going to end up, these hybrid modalities are kind of in the 60, 65% gross margins, which you have to be thoughtful about when you
I've observed in the market that those AI solutions that sort of empower the clinician, the provider, whatever, are obviously getting greater adoption than those that are trying to replace, at least out of the gate, right? And so you see where clinicians are adopting this AI technology to improve their day, to reduce burnout, to do less charting, whatever. Those seem to have captured more of the dollars and opportunity than those that come out of the gate saying, "I'm just going to replace workers." Curious if you're seeing that theme too.
I think that's definitely true. Look, the scribe functionality, like doctors deserve it. These poor physicians have been asked to do a job, take care of humans, and then be data monkeys, right? Like if you ever spend time with your physician friends, they have a day job and then their night job is a glass of wine and trying to get through filling out all the, doing charting. Like that's miserable. We have so abusive of this class that I have so much empathy for them. And so, yeah, of course they love the scribes. Of course they love being able to actually get the leverage that every other worker has deserved in terms of productivity tools. I think the challenge is like just being a scribe is not sufficient, right? Like being able to do the read write, being able to have all the clinical context, which is why I think you've seen this adoption cycle of these amazing tools. But long term, Epic is going to take a lot of the value, right? I'm on the board of Elation, which has done a lot of work in refocusing its EHR. It's a cloud-based EHR. It's the young one because it's only 15 years old relative to everybody else who's 20, 30, 40 years old. And we've been but we have our own scribe, but it actually is integrated in the entire process versus just being an add-on, which is where I think you're going to see a lot of value. But I do agree that the adoption cycles are there because there was such a big need for it. And that's just enhancing. That's just allowing physicians to do their job without being miserable. I think we're seeing a lot of the it's a human plus AI is in the revenue cycle management and a lot of the other administrative tasks where prior authorization and other stuff, which is the question of AI, of this, of the insane amount we spend on healthcare, $3 trillion is administration. That's a big opportunity, but figuring out what is really capable of being technology versus technologies just fighting with technologies. I think we're still in the early innings there.
Emily, back to the VC activity this year, we've seen a lot of interest from these really large generalist funds that have backed a lot of companies in the space this year. I'm curious your take on that model versus the funds like Threshold, Define, which have kind of staked out this position in healthcare specifically.
Yeah, I don't think it's a zero-sum game, right? I think you want, it's who you want to, and Michael knows this, I sit on the board with some of these funds, and I worked with Hemant and the general counsel team at Livongo, and also engaged with them at Transcarent, right? And I kind of joke, I'm in the room and I put in $10 million and he's put in $400 million. We're not the same at all. But there's still
they
value
own a
in different
hospital.
points of view and helping the team and navigate that. And I think founders, you want to be careful. You don't want someone who completely controls your destiny. You want different voices around the table. You do want different levels of expertise. Healthcare had always been something Bessemer's been doing this for a while. And Andreessen has the sub funds, right? I think their healthcare is interesting. Vanita running it, it's half life sciences, half kind of healthcare delivery. And so the biotech piece, I think, is a little bit different and looking what happens there. General Catalyst it's Hemant's thing, right? Which is, I think it's not just about doing venture investing. I think he actually is the first one that looks the least like venture, right? What he is doing in buying a hospital, what he is doing in terms of the brand venture, how that all plays out. So I think that it's not even and Lightspeed is kind of dabbling in it, right? And is now much more on the AI side versus the others. So it's not there's here's what all the big guys are doing consistently, because they're actually not being consistent, even with their own individual strategies. And then you're kind of seeing some sub funds. Lynn and I are kind of what I would say that mid-size fund, right? We just raised our fifth fund, a $350 million fund. Early stage, I can give you that. I don't know what that means anymore because the vernacular's all over the place. But like, we're taking board seats, we're hands-on investing, can, write lead checks of 5 to 15 million with the idea we'll support the companies throughout. I think that's kind of that's a harder breed right now. And you do have to have something that makes you stand out. Then you've seen in the last 5 years, a ton of these micro VC funds, like small early phase, there's a ton of this in women's health that are all going after. And the problem I have is like, I could only do like a couple deals a year. And you see all these seeds that are getting done. Like they're doing a ton of these companies with their little $50 million fund. Andreessen did 90 seeds last year. So they're also doing their own seeds or competing on it. And then it's like, and then what? Who does the A's? Who does the work? So if you can't get one of the mega funds involved, your narrowing is really substantial. We're seeing a ton of like the seed extensions, multiple seed extensions. And so I think that you're going to see a lot more companies really struggle to raise capital because of the way that the ecosystem is. And that's in general, but I think it's particularly pronounced in healthcare.
Yeah. Say more. You had some thoughts around what's going on in the VC world now.
When I was started in the business, 2000, everything was great. Funds got bigger and then they kind of shrunk back down, right? And it was more steady state. And then you had the ecosystem, which was like, there's some seed funds, the early stage funds, growth funds, and then you go public, right? And it kind of, everyone played well with each other. And you kind of knew everyone where they were in the lane. That's completely different now, right? You have the most prolific seed funds are also the ones that are the largest and being able to write the biggest checks. Like people are playing up and down the stack. I don't think with a market correction that funds are suddenly going to get smaller. I think you're going to have a handful of 5 to 7 funds that are the mega $10 billion plus funds. I think that's here to stay, right? They structure them all differently, right? Again, Sequoia could raise whatever they wanted, and they raised a seed fund and a Series A fund that are still in that 300 to 400 million, but then unlimited capital on the other side almost, right? And a hedge fund structure essentially with the evergreen to like Andreessen announcing they're going to raise a $20 billion fund. So I think there's a big lean in and lots of capital, but like different strategies. For someone like me, I have to think about it in terms of how do my companies have to play in that ecosystem, right? Because it's like, if I can't get that follow-on capital, then there isn't any follow-on capital. But if they're not doing the growth stage, do you need to bring them in early or not? How does that play out? And I'd be lying if I said I have it all figured out. Yeah. And I think their strategies and their teams are changing as well. But it is something that I'm really cognizant of, which is, the playbook that I've had for the last 20 years in terms of how I think about my seed friends and then my follow-on investor friends, like it's all out the window. And almost every single investment, honestly, it's its own little unicorn that I got to figure out the right investment. That could be financial investments, that could be strategic investments. It's just a lot more work to really help ensure these companies can be successful.
Yeah, Emily, as you're doing that diligence and thinking about it, what do you look for in a company when you're like, I'm gonna write a term sheet here?
It's always true for any founder, but even more so true for healthcare, which is it's not just the what, but the why, right? Because the why doesn't change. The what can evolve. Being a founder is not a rational choice. Is so hard, and you have to get your teeth kicked in on a regular basis. And I feel like there is a subset of like people who go to Stanford and they go to YC and then start a business and get a easy raising that haven't yet experienced that. Or I've seen the other side where they melt down the first time things don't go their way because they do think the trajectory looked like this. And it's like, I feel like, again, maybe back to the old point, like Facebook did a down round. No one talks about that, right? There was a down round in their history. I was at DFJ during Tesla. I remember when Elon was sleeping on the floor and that was going to go out of business before Christmas and they had to pull that funding together. We would fund SpaceX and the rocket would blow up. And you weren't sure it was going to make it. 26 years in, it looks like 20 years in, it looks like an amazing company. There was a number of times there where he was running it profitably and on the edge, very close to do this. So the capital efficiency and that need to really be innovative and build long-term, that has to come from something inherent. And if you have a founder that thinks it's an easy road or expects the world to come to them, him or her, they're going to be really disappointed. And in healthcare, a lot of them have a really personal story. One of my founders, Imogen, his father was misdiagnosed at a top health institute. They went and said he had pneumonia and he had lung cancer. A year later, he was dead. And then he, in his 20s, he was Ray Dalio's chief of staff. He was diagnosed with cancer because he got access to the right and he got a second opinion on a scan and was like, this is just crazy. Like, this should not be left to luck. Like, how can we actually fix this? And so Like, there's the ups and downs in that business, but I know why he is doing it. I know the North Star, and you're constantly doing it. So the first thing you really look at is like why they're doing it. Are they in it for the long term? And then I think it comes with a level of humility. Because if you go in saying, I got this, I'm going to change healthcare and everyone's going to abide by my will, like that will not work. Healthcare is a complex ecosystem where you have to align incentives and you have to understand that complexity of how you actually think about going to market. I think Glenn Tillman is one of the best at this, to be honest. And that didn't come from success, right? He did Allscripts, but he got fired from Allscripts. And then he came back. And so again, those stories of like really understanding the challenges of healthcare and how you do and having that humility to come back and figure it out. That's another really big piece of it. And then I think it is this leverage. Like, why are you doing something that's unique? I think healthcare, it's so local, and it's so that like a lot of people want to abstract that and make it seem like it's actually like a software layer that exists, but they end up starting in something that is not really repeatable. And that's like private equity, right? Private equity is the all the different boxes and then you scale them up. Venture is usually where you can actually figure out something horizontal and get to real scale. And so having really honest conversations with them about, is this a truly horizontal or is there another kind of funding approach that you should take, because this is going to end up taking a lot longer to get to venture scale. And that's okay. Like the venture, once you raise money from venture, the clock starts ticking. And now more than ever, because AI, everyone expects everything to go up and down. But some of the best businesses take 15, 20 plus years. You just have to find different financing mechanisms to do that if that's your long-term ambition.
What are some general trends in term sheets that you saw over 2025 that were unusual?
This has been the largest variety of term sheets that I have seen in a 12-month period. And Michael is smiling at me because he has seen some of these. So
Michael has written them. Yeah.
Yeah, Michael has written some of them. So to the have companies or companies that everyone's on, you see founders taking secondaries. You see term sheets where they're controlling the board at a multiple. You're seeing, really light sense requirements or everything else in terms of so there's a subset of terms. There's a lot of hot companies that are getting term sheets over the weekend that look really light and are giving us such a lot of control. And I think a lot of those are being viewed as just options. Like, we'll wait to see, but we're around the table, and if things get interesting, then we can really lean in with a meaningful check. So a lot of those are led by larger entities that a $10 million check or $5 million doesn't mean anything. You're waiting to see if the $30, $50, $75 billion check makes sense. And so you're not trying to construct that that kind of control at that point. And then you're seeing the companies that can't raise, like we talked, the death desert of people who've raised or trying to do recaps. And Michael and I know, so when I started at DFJ, there was a lot of we did a lot of the pay to play structures. And so I was I knew how to do it. And you would be shocked. And he's smiling. You'd be shocked how many of our peers who've raised a lot of money or very successful genuinely didn't have any idea what any of those terms meant. And so when you start to actually have to do the pay to play or think about aligning incentives, it's not just about the deal structure, it's educating people. And so you're getting back into a world where there is some pretty hairy term sheets that aren't just hairy because they're hairy, but they're hairy because people didn't understand the implications of what they were signing up for in earlier rounds. And then the seed stuff, I think it is just what is that? It's always that shifting goal of what to get to an A. And then as people are getting nervous about that, it's to bridge to what, right? Or an extension to what? And if it's not an A, then it's we got to get to profitability, or trying to put operational things in these term sheets to try to see if they can get an A's and others. But I think that's a really challenged place to be, right?
Yeah, the number of down rounds we're doing these days is really increased pretty materially. Emily, and you and I have seen it, and you're right. I am surprised, and maybe I shouldn't be, but I am surprised when there's a lot of emotion on the investor side of the discussion. When unfortunately, I preach this so often to our founders, take a down round with clean terms any day and every day over,
it's
a
on
flat
Michael's
round
bumper
round.
sticker. That
Yeah,
says
it just
Take your
drives me
medicine.
crazy. Take your medicine.
No dirty terms.
And then investors who either have run out of cash and can't do it, we got to do a pay to play, and it's the only way to try to clean up the liquidation preference stack. It's just hard. It's a very emotional moment, I think, for a lot of these companies, and particularly the headwinds that I feel have increased in the back half of the year here. So it's hard, but you're right. We're seeing a lot of it, and these extension rounds. I mean, companies are so lucky to have Emily on their board, because I've seen this in action, where she's like, okay, but to what? What are we doing? What is the outcome here of putting in another $5 or $10 million? And the insiders are literally passing the hat around, trying to come up with $1 million here, a couple $1 million there. And the founders has got to be held her and his feet got to be held to the fire. What are we going to do with this capital? How are we going to get to another inflection point to either let us go raise money in a proper Series A or B or C or whatever it is, or let's find an exit strategy for this thing. And right now there's a little bit of panic I sense in the market where it's like, let's just raise capital. But Emily brings this financial discipline that I wish a lot of other VCs would also, in sort of asking the hard question, okay, what is this bridging us to? And I see a lot of companies like, let's just raise the capital, but okay, to what end? What are we doing with that?
Can I ask a question about that? Do you think it's because these might be companies that are like 4 or 5 years old that raise their seed in a different environment, and then now the expectations for the A or B are different from what it was when they started?
The A, the B, the C. I mean, there's so many, like,
We've
all
changed
of
the
those are
goalpost.
challenged. Yeah,
Yeah.
everything. The goalpost changed for the
100%.
founders, and the goalpost changed for the investors, right? Pain avoidance is a really strong psychological desire. And so, like, let's just, like, don't deal with it now and we'll deal with it later, which is the absolute worst thing in investing. And so, like, I sometimes feel like I'm Cassandra. I'm just like the bearer of bad news, but I am like, you take your medicine, let's just do everything out. Because then the more I understand everything bad, the more I have a chance to fix it. And if I just delay stuff, bad issues always get worse. They never get better over time. Like, you never just grow out of a problem. You don't. I do think that the founder psychology is one that's really challenging that you got to navigate, especially for these younger founders that have been told they're great and are on the covers of magazines and now things are not working and they're like, wait a minute, this isn't supposed to happen. Then there's a lot of issues with a lot of these investors, right, that have been carrying these things at high prices. There's a lot of people out fundraising that don't want to take the marks down. So I'd rather do an extension. And so versus actually having to face reality of what is this really worth, or I don't want to have to go back to my LPs and explain what's going on. So Michael's seen me do this. A lot of times I'll be like, with my threshold hat on, here's all my issues, but taking off threshold and just looking at this company, this is what we have to do. And those two may be in conflict. Like, what I want to do to protect threshold, what's best interest of threshold, may not be what we need to do right now for the company. And I try to do that because sometimes I see a lot of investors that are talking their own book, that are doing what's best for their particular fund, where they are in the fund cycle, or they're trying to get promoted in a fund as a junior person who doesn't want to go to the partners and tell them what's really going on. There's all of that stuff that goes into it that you have to help navigate. And so getting everyone to just bear truth and being really honest about here's what we're starting from and then building off of it, it's usually not a pleasant experience, but I think it's required if companies are going to survive. Otherwise, you're just setting it inevitable.
So do you have advice for those that feel like they're the have-nots right now?
Yeah. I mean, I think the one thing I will say is that, again, maybe this is the going through various cycles. SpaceX is the most valuable private company in the world right now. That was not a really interesting business for a lot of other investors for a very long time. 15 years, 10 years, right? So I remember someone yelling at Steve Jurvetson, like, you're, throwing money at your personal habit because you like throwing your pockets, right? Like, it wasn't, it's like, we shouldn't invest in this. This is stupid. I think that when we're talking about building long-term sustainable businesses that can create real value, there's always some up and down, and that there is some, like, that capital efficiency and being in it in the long term. I asked one of the executives on the S7 of Amazon, if Amazon had gone public at a different time, like in 2015, and capital has been free, what would have happened? And because they weren't profitable, right? But they ran their cash flow really closely. And one of the most heated debates they had was whether or not they should do AWS. And it was being creative with the limited balance sheets to create a cost center and drive it to be a profit center, right? And it's like, if we had someone just throw me a couple $100 million, I would have had a hard time arguing, like, we should spend all this money building a tech and we're not sure if it's even going to work. Like, we should just actually buy the iron. That would have been one of the biggest businesses, the cloud, the evolution that wouldn't have existed. So constraints create better businesses. Capital constraints create innovation and create better businesses. And we've lost that in this market. And so when you have those companies that are in the dirt, I'm like, this is your opportunity. It's horrible. And I'm not trying to belittle the challenges, but it's also freeing for you because you get to actually think completely differently. And it allows you to actually create. And then the upside there, like, if you make it, the upside, I'd be rather have one of these recaps and then have people be happy and aligned versus be sitting on a $10 billion, $20 billion valuation that I know I'm never going to go into and just be freaking out about it for the next decade. Like, it's not. Doing that work actually really gives them the opportunity to create real value.
So Emily, as we round out 2025, if you were writing a State of the Union for health tech right now, what would the thesis be?
So I gave a speech on this recently, and I'm in it. I'm a big long-term believer. So I don't want to say all this negative stuff. Like, there's a reason that I am going into this and I have all these conversations because I believe long-term. And use some numbers. The GDP is $30 trillion. Our debt is $38 trillion, right? And our deficit's almost $2 trillion. Healthcare is $5.6 trillion this year, about 18%. I think one of the things that's really, like, when you zoom out, if you think about it, in 2024, GDP grew by 2.8%. Healthcare costs grew by 8.2%.
Wow.
4x
Wow.
GDP growth. So I'm just saying, if that, you think about that, if that, even though say takes it down, it's just 2x. GDP grows at 4%, but we're growing at 6%. When that starts to cross over into a terrifying land is really soon. So why healthcare? It's an economic, political, moral, social imperative. We figure it out. And we can't throw bodies at it. And we have to actually all zoom out and be like, the current system is not working. It's not working in that we're not getting the great outcomes for people. It's not working in that it's the more of the haves and have-nots. It's not working in the sense we're going to keep taxing ourselves to death on this. So I do believe that technology is the unlock there. I really do. And I do believe that AI has huge possibilities of that, of that 5.6 trillion. Almost half of it is like administrative stuff. We should be able to take that out, right? We should be able to enhance. Doctors should be able to actually take care of their patients, and we should be able to give them scribes and tools and everything to be able to manage this. We should take out the PBMs. We should not have intermediaries taking billions of dollars out of this and not creating value. And I think technology both can replace some of the humans, but also bring transparency to this ecosystem that allows us to fix it. So that's my thesis. But it's not get rich quick. It's going to be work, and it's going to take time, and that's okay. And so you have to make sure you get investors that are aligned in doing that over 10, 15, 20 years. But if someone is looking like for my markup in the next 18 months or my markup in 6 months and I need to be in the cool kids club, I am worried that those companies end up chasing the wrong things versus solving the really meaty problem that we have here. And so that's why I'm still in it. I'm still doing it. I'm a big believer in it. But yeah, we got to find the right founders that are willing to fight the good fight.
And you're really good at it, Emily.
Yep. Well, I can't think of a better way to end. So, Emily, thank you so much for all your insights. We had quite the year. We appreciate you being such a great leader in the space and for you joining us today.
Thank you guys so much for having me. I really enjoyed it.